All the characters in the story are over 18 years old. After graduating from high school, a young American girl, Jessica, faced a real dilemma. She could not find her vocation. Despite the fact that she studied well and had incredible beauty, choosing a profession became a serious problem for her. On the one hand, the thought that she could spend her whole life at an office desk did not leave her. Jessica didn't want to be trapped in four walls, doing the same tasks day after day, and dreamed of seeing the world and experiencing its diversity. On the other hand, professions that didn't require office work didn't inspire her enthusiasm. This internal contradiction led to the fact that the girl stayed at home for another year after school, thinking about where to study next, under harsh criticism from her parents. They were worried about her future and strongly advised her to choose a specific profession, but Jessica could not decide. She realized that time was running out and that she was losing a precious year of her life, but it was incredibly difficult to make a choice. One day, when Jessica was browsing social media, she came across an offer from a modeling agency that noticed her Facebook profile. It was an unexpected opportunity for her. Since she desperately needed money, the girl, without hesitation, agreed to the proposal, full of hope. However, when she started working with the agency, it turned out that it wasn't that simple. She expected to be offered a job right away, shooting music videos, photo shoots that she had long dreamed of trying, but no invitations were received. Every day she spent waiting increased her frustration. Thus, almost a whole year has passed, filled with uncertainty and expectation. But soon, the day after her 18th birthday, when Jessica was thinking about how to change her life, the phone suddenly rang. She looked at the phone screen and saw an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" the girl said with uncertainty, not expecting that this call could change anything in her life. "Is that Jessica?" A gruff male voice rang out on the other end of the line. "Yes," she replied, feeling a surge of excitement inside. This call could be the beginning of a new chapter in her life. "We noticed your portfolio, and we liked it more than all the others," the man continued. His voice sounded confident and even a little authoritative. "I'm listening," Jessica tried to answer calmly, although excitement still crept into her voice. She tried to maintain a professional tone without giving in to emotion. "The fact is that we are planning a congress of oligarchs here," said the interlocutor, "and we would like to order a model. Don't worry, we need the model for decoration and some entertainment. We pay a lot." "What kind of entertainment?" Jessica asked warily, feeling that the situation was becoming more and more unusual. "Your hands will be tied. In return, we will pay $1 million, the man said, his voice remaining calm, as if the most common issue was being discussed. Jessica was about to refuse, but suddenly realized that the amount that the stranger had told her made her speechless. She couldn't even imagine how long it would take her to earn that kind of money by working in any profession. A few seconds of silence stretched out, and Jessica came to her senses, realizing that this offer was a chance that not everyone gets. But her pride still wouldn't let her just say yes. "Well, is there an answer?" the man asked with cold calmness, as if expecting her to make a choice. "I agree," the girl replied almost automatically, not fully realizing that she had already agreed to this risky proposal. "Fine," he said. "Come tomorrow at 1800 hours to the address that I will send you." "Okay," Jessica nodded, trying to collect her thoughts. After that, they said goodbye, and the call ended. The next morning, at the specified time, Jessica took a taxi to the address she had been texted. She chose a rather casual outfit for the meeting, simple clothes that do not attract attention, so as not to look too provocative. When she saw the building, she was surprised by how huge it was. However, the appearance did not mean at all that something unusual or significant could happen inside. The girl hesitantly went inside and found herself in a huge hall. Around her, there were modern, expensive doors that commanded respect, but at the same time caused slight concern. Jessica looked around, and seeing that the door ahead was closed, she decided to knock. The sound of her knocking echoed through the space, but there was no response. The girl looked around again, trying to calm her nerves, and repeated the knock. Her heart started beating faster, and she felt that this meeting could change her life. "Who are you going to see?" the servant asked, stopping in front of Jessica with a straight face. "I was invited as a model," she replied in a trembling voice, trying to hide the excitement that was growing in her chest. "Follow me," the servant commanded, without waiting for further questions, and headed forward. Jessica carefully closed the door behind her, listening to the muffled sound it made. She felt uneasy, but she tried to follow the man who didn't seem to show any interest in her. The servant led her into one of the offices in the corridor, where the door opened under the onslaught of a broad-shouldered but rather fat man, clearly in the style of a mafia. He looked like he was always in control of the situation. "Jessica? What is it?" he asked with a piercing look, noticing the girl. "Yes," Jessica began, but her words were cut short. "Get changed," he said, pointing to a closet in the corner. "There are your clothes for tonight's show." "And the payment?" Jessica asked quietly, not believing that she was here, and already beginning to doubt the correctness of her choice, since the atmosphere in the office was very tense and unpleasant. The man silently handed her the check, and then, without saying a word, left the office, closing the door behind him. She heard his voice, responding to some instructions from the servants, gradually disappearing into the corridor. Jessica picked up the check and quickly ran her eyes over the numbers. Indeed, there was $1 million written in her name. She felt anxiety and excitement stir in her chest, and, hiding the check in her purse, she went to the closet. After a moment of hesitation and gathering her thoughts, Jessica changed her clothes. When she looked at herself in the mirror in her office, she was overcome by a mixed feeling of excitement and curiosity. She looked different. Her confidence increased in the chosen clothes, but her fear remained. Finally, having made up her mind, the girl went out the door where the man had recently disappeared and found herself in a long corridor. It was a little uncomfortable for her to be in a cool space in such an outfit, but, overcoming her worries, she went straight down the corridor to the big door at the end. When she opened the door, Jessica entered a huge room filled with cameras and people who were sitting around and discussing something among themselves. As soon as she closed the door behind her, all eyes turned to her, as if she had become the center of attention. At that moment, a young guy ran up to her, dressed in a sleeveless t-shirt and jeans, with pumped-up arms and a friendly smile on his face. "Are you Jessica?" "What is it?" he asked, holding out his hand to her. "Yes," the girl replied, shaking his hand, feeling her heart beat faster. "I'm John," the guy said, still smiling. "Please go to the center of the hall." Jessica timidly walked to the center of the room, feeling all the eyes of those around her riveted on her. Her heart was racing when John, the guy with the pumped-up arms, came over and secured her hands in chains above her head, and then jacked her up a little so that she was almost on her toes, standing on her toes. The people around her became quiet, everyone's attention focused on her, and there was a tense atmosphere in the air. "Are you ready?" John asked, looking straight into her eyes. Jessica, feeling a chill run through her body, nodded her head. At that moment, several people ran up to the large video cameras that were installed around and began to set up the equipment. The older participants of the event, mostly fat men in formal suits, took their seats, preparing to watch what would happen next. "Well, let's get started," John said, and his face became serious. He picked up a thick, long whip and walked over to Jessica, preparing for the first blow. Swinging, he hit the ground, and there was a loud bang that made Jessica flinch, feeling fear fill her. John raised the whip again and hit Jessica. The blow was painful, and the intense pain brought tears to the girl's eyes. She felt the world begin to blur around her, and her only feeling was the unbearable pain that filled her entire being. John paused, lifted her on the jack so that she was hanging in the air, and then began to whip her all over her body again. Jessica sobbed loudly, her tears streaming down her face, but no one around her paid attention to her, and her screams only caused laughter and enthusiastic cheers among the audience. When she lowered her head, she felt especially ashamed. She was hanging over a pool of her tears, which were slowly gathering on the floor. "Leave her alone," a voice called from the audience. Jessica looked up and saw some fat oligarch approaching her. He walked over to her and ran his hand over her face, wiping away the tears. His movements were unexpectedly gentle, and he adjusted her hair, slightly covering her face. "You're very beautiful," he said, his voice full of admiration. "John, seeing that the banquet customers had found a new toy for themselves, stepped back with a whip in his hand. Following the example of the oligarch, other men began to approach Jessica, and she felt extremely uncomfortable, wanting the whole situation to end. "Are you silent? What is it?" one of them asked, squeezing her chin with his hand so that she couldn't close her mouth. "You're going to talk now." "Not now." The other oligarchs intervened, pulling him aside, and he nervously sat down on a chair, but a queue had already formed behind him. "She's had enough," someone from the audience said, and John, after nodding in the affirmative, lowered her to the ground and untied her. Jessica felt exhausted. She struggled to her feet, and John, seeing her condition, offered to help. With his help, she headed to the locker room. When she entered the room, she found that there was no shower, so she quickly dressed and went outside, trying not to meet the eyes of passers-by, feeling ashamed and embarrassed. "Stop." Suddenly, the man who met her at the beginning ran out to her. "Come in for a minute." Jessica went to him in the hall, feeling her heart pounding with anxiety. There were other oligarchs standing behind the man, their sly looks betraying that they had agreed on something in advance. The atmosphere around them became even more tense, and Jessica felt excitement rising. "We're doubling the amount, but you're coming with us. Do you agree?" the man said. His voice sounded confident, as if he already knew the answer. Jessica hesitated a little, her thoughts flitting between fear and a thirst for freedom. She took a deep breath and finally answered, "Yes." "Now go," he said with a satisfied smile, as if he had just won a big hand. He handed the girl the same amount he had paid her earlier. Jessica paled, feeling her inner doubts struggle with the desire to escape from this situation. But she had no choice, and trying to remain calm, she moved from the hall of the house to the nearest tree. The oligarchs stood and smiled, watching the model, their gazes full of arrogance and anticipation. Some of them even took out their phones to capture the moment. Jessica felt trapped, her face warming with shame, and her hands trembling with tension. Passers-by began to stop, looking at her curiously, and some also began filming her on their cameras. Lowering her eyes, Jessica couldn't stand it and ran home, trying not to think about what was happening around her. She felt tears coming to her eyes, but at that moment, the only thing that mattered to her was to get to the safety of her home as quickly as possible. After running a sufficient distance from the entrance, she stopped a taxi and, sighing with relief, got inside, ignoring the surprised look of the driver. "I'll ask you to pay me an extra $100 to clean the seat," he said, studying her in the mirror. Jessica, feeling her heart pounding from the stress, paid the announced amount without asking any questions. She quickly jumped out of the car, giving the driver a grateful but at the same time frightened look. She ran home, passing by the surprised neighborhood children who were playing in the yard and looked at her in disbelief. After locking the door of her apartment, Jessica felt all the worries suddenly overwhelm her. Everything that was happening seemed unreal to her, as if it were a dream. After a quick shower that washed away the remnants of that creepy atmosphere, she finally calmed down and, tired of worrying, fell asleep. She never saw these men again, and it seemed to her that everything that had happened was in the past, like a nightmare that would not happen again.